All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for showing up this morning to officially welcome back Kelly Kroskoff as President of Basketball Business Operations for the Indiana Fever.
No one anticipated this. At last, the quiet part was said aloud by the president of the Indiana Fever, the woman seated at the top of the entire organization. Furthermore, her remarks raised more than just eyebrows. It ignited the world of basketball. When you hear the whole story, everything you believe to be true about Caitlin Clark's circumstances in Indiana is altered. This is because, for the first time, the truth about what's actually happening inside that franchise, the politics, the pressure, the dynamics in the locker room, the struggle between building a brand and building a winner, came to light. Let's return to the actual beginning of this tale. Indiana was one of the most unmemorable teams in all of professional basketball before Caitlin Clark ever put on a Hoosier uniform. There will be 6 victories in 2021, 5 in 2022, and 13 in 2023. They were a joke for almost 10 years. No spotlight, no buzz, no fans. The WNBA scene had fully moved on from whatever the Fever had been, and neither the cameras nor the spectators were filling the seats. That was the truth. A once proud franchise has become a mere afterthought. However, despite their best efforts, no one in that front office could have planned what transpired. As soon as the first overall pick in the 2024 WNBA draft entered the room, everything completely changed. Not only did Caitlin Clark lower the Fever. With record-breaking TV ratings, sellout crowds everywhere she played, jerseys flying off the shelves, and a media frenzy that had not been witnessed in women's basketball since, well, ever, she completely transformed the league. And the organization had to make a decision in the midst of that explosion. Were they going to try to steer the wave in a different direction, or were they going to ride it? At that point, the entire narrative becomes intriguing. Because the front office made a decision that surprised many people just when the Fever needed someone at the top who knew exactly what they had. A once-in-a-generation athlete who was single-handedly changing what was possible for women's sports. Kelly Kroskoff was appointed as their new president of business operations and basketball. It made sense on paper. Kroskoff had previously created the Fever, was a member of the team that won the 2012 title, and was intimately familiar with the company. She was introduced by the squad with all the anticipated excitement. However, something in her messaging from her first news conference sparked concerns that many at the time ignored, and that would come back to haunt the entire company months later. No one noticed the warning signs until it was too late, since they were hidden in plain sight. This is the moment when everything fell apart. July of 2025. Caitlin Clark's injury-related absence is a problem for the Fever. By that time in the season, Clark had only played 11 games due to a groin problem that had been plaguing her for weeks. Fans are irritated. The club is on the verge of making the playoffs. There is increasing pressure. In the midst of all of that, on the day that video from Kroskoff's first press conference somehow resurfaces on social media, the internet discovers something hidden within that speech from October 2024 that the majority of people had completely ignored. Kroskoff looked directly into the cameras during that press conference and remarked, "This is about the Indiana Fever. Yes, Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston are core players, and we plan to keep adding to them. However, I want this team to be a national leader and a long-lasting brand. Like Apple, for example." 5 phrases. Like Apple, for example. It only required that. The video became viral in a matter of hours, and the fanbase exploded. Because that wasn't a vision that many people heard in that sentence. It served as a caution. The Fever front office had never witnessed such a response. Fans weren't only angry. They were organized, boisterous, and hard to ignore when they were angry. Because of what Apple actually accomplished. The comparison to Apple struck a different chord. One visionary, Steve Jobs, was the focal point of their identity, and his departure almost brought down the entire company. Therefore, when Clark's fans heard the Fever president use that very analogy, they perceived something in it that seemed illuminating. Clark was already viewed by the organization as a component of the jigsaw rather than its focal point. One fan responded on social media to enduring brands that embrace their ideas. Steve Jobs became Apple's star and visionary, making the company a global icon. Another fan didn't hold back either. "We predict that the Fever will realize they lost the greatest chance in women's sports history when Clark eventually decides she's had enough of what they called a front office skip fire." The same basic emotion pervaded the message boards, comment sections, and replies. You don't minimize the most significant person this team has ever had, and you don't stop focusing on her. The pushback was a verdict, not just noise. And someone in that organization realized just how dire things were becoming. Because Krauskopf's entire X account disappeared a few hours after the video became viral. Entirely absent. No declaration, no justification. Where there had been a social media presence only days earlier, there was now only stillness. This is where it becomes even more complex. Because the players on the floor, the ones who actually suit up next to Caitlin Clark every night, were conveying an entirely different tale while the front office was being attacked online. A far more truthful one. One of Clark's closest teammates, Lexi Hull, went down for a piece in Glamour magazine and didn't hold back. I believe there is a degree of jealousy regarding the Fever, simply because of the media attention and the supporters who have supported us since Caitlin arrived. Hull stated something that everyone in the league already knew, but that hardly anyone wearing a Fever uniform had been willing to say publicly before. She even went so far as to say that clubs in the league had been having candid conversations in their own locker rooms, stating stuff like, "We can't allow the Fever to prevail." An uncomfortable reality that had been developing for 2 seasons was revealed by Hull's remarks. These days, the Fever do more than simply play basketball. Every time they on the court, they enter a setting where other teams have singled them out due to a single individual on their roster rather than the team's overall performance. Sophie Cunningham went one step farther. The player who established herself as Clark's enforcer on the floor and who made it apparent early on that taking cheap shots at her teammate would have repercussions had already stepped forward and verified what the entire league had been speculating about. Cunningham claimed to have heard it prior to joining Indiana. She claimed that when she was still in Phoenix, there were clear discussions in the locker room about Clark and that opponents were attempting to make a point rather than just win. The story of Clark being physically targeted and receiving an endless welcome to the W moment had been captured on camera during the entire season. Even impartial spectators were struck by the intensity of the physical play aimed at Clark. And many were seriously questioning if the officiating had adequately safeguarded her by the time her groin injury ended her season after just 13 games. A growing percentage of people who were paying careful attention said that the answer was no. However, that was only the tip of the iceberg. Because the inside story of what it's really like to be Caitlin Clark's colleague was beginning to surface while all of this was unfolding in public. Furthermore, it was not what the critics had anticipated. A straightforward story was the one that Caitlin Clark's detractors had pushed the hardest. That she caused trouble in the changing area. She was disliked by the players. That no team could endure the fractures caused by the attention and celebrity. In September 2024, Hall of Famer Cheryl Swoops said on a podcast that important players on the Fever were subtly expressing their disinterest in attending. That they were no longer able to handle the circumstances around Clark. It quickly spread. Everywhere, it was repeated. Or, as the Fever continued into their second season together, it became part of the background hum. However, Clark addressed it head-on when she was questioned about it while making an appearance as a guest on a different March Madness program presented by Sue Bird and Diana Taurasi. She wasn't upset. She didn't act defensively. She was incredibly composed about it, basically stating that you become used to people believing they know what goes on behind closed doors when in reality they don't. Additionally, the teammates that were there in that locker room continued to support her. In the 2025 playoffs, Clark's teammates swarmed the floor once she recovered from her injuries. They interrupted her interview after the game. They arrived for her at moments that no one had planned. Even the locker room celebration after the Fever won the Commissioner's Cup was entirely sincere. Players bonded in a way that didn't seem like an act, laughing and genuinely delighted for one another. This is what no one in the media has yet to compile. Whether or if Caitlin Clark's teammates liked her was never the main focus of the Fever narrative. It concerned whether the front office, which was in charge of them all, was prepared to surround her with the appropriate elements and give the project their whole attention. The gap is that, because the ties were genuine on the court level, Clark was close to Aaliyah Boston. Lexi Hull was guarded. Before they had even played a game together, new players like Sophie Cunningham were raving about Clark. The rookie who made the final roster, Michaela Timpson, spoke of Clark with a kind of sincere admiration that is impossible to fake. The devotion wasn't fake when Clark wrote things like, "My Aussie for life," for Chloe Bibby and "Cub I love you," for Christy Wallace in her Instagram comments following the expansion draft. These were genuine connections. However, connections don't win titles on their own. And that was the tension at the heart of it all. What Kelly Krauskopf stated during the press conference in October 2024. In fact, there is something in the complete version, not just the Apple soundbite, that many people overlooked in their haste to express their displeasure. Krauskopf discussed the long term when she stated that she wanted the Fever to be a lasting brand. She claimed that when Indiana won its lone championship in 2012, Caitlin Clark was 10 years old. That reaching the next level can occasionally take a generation. That the organization had been creating for someone else all along, sowing the seeds for a 10-year-old someplace who could find inspiration in the Fever we're currently experiencing. Your opinion of the front office's true priorities will determine whether you consider that to be a vision or a diversion. However, this cannot be disputed. Due to a brand, the fans who attended the Fever beginning in 2024 did not show up. A player was the reason they came. They spent hours behind the wheel. They made payments that the WNBA had never seen before. The league had never anticipated the number of people that watched games. Additionally, the attention vanished in quantifiable, recorded, and publicly acknowledged ways when Clark was not on the floor due to an injury. Sales of tickets decreased. TV ratings declined. There was no denying the stark, brutal reality of what Clark meant to that franchise. However, the message from the top of the company kept returning to the team, the institution, and the brand, as though the person spearheading all of that attention was somehow apart from it. One statement made by Krauskopf at that press conference stood out from the others. She stated that you would want to play with Caitlin Clark if you are an intelligent basketball player and you see how she plays. And even she probably didn't realize at the time how accurate that turned out to be. Because the Fever's recruiting success had subtly emerged as one of the WNBA's most intriguing tales. In order to travel to Indiana, players had to accept wage reductions. The chance to play with Clark was the deciding factor for veterans. In addition to packing arenas, Clark's fan base inspired players to want to be a part of something greater than a typical WNBA season. The Fever had emerged as one of the league's most sought-after locations, almost in spite of themselves. Not because of a brand strategy, but rather because of a basketball player who improved everyone around her and packed buildings wherever she went. Let's go on to 2026 and all that the Fever will be doing in the future. In the WNBA expansion draft, the team lost 2 players. Christy Wallace to Toronto, Chloe Bibby to Portland. Clark herself had to deal with a season that was meant to be her breakthrough second year, but instead it was a nightmare of injuries that kept her to just 13 games throughout the regular season. She nevertheless averaged 16.5 points, 8.5 assists, and 5 rebounds per game. Made it to the All-Star game nonetheless. Even when she was wearing civilian clothing and sitting on the sidelines, still remained the league's focus of attention. Beneath it all, the Fever are building a $78 million performance center that Krauskopf named the foundation for the next generation. This facility won't even open until 2027 and is intended to be the kind of home base that draws top talent for many years to come. The components are in place. The concern is whether those in charge of making decisions above the court are aware of their current situation and whether they plan to address it before it's too late. The larger reality, which underlies all of the controversies surrounding Clark's teammates, the Fever's front office, and the turmoil in the locker room, is actually far more straightforward than any of it. In just 1 year, this team went from winning 5 games a season to being the most watched team in women's basketball. It's not a reconstruction. It's a revolution. Furthermore, brand strategy decks do not lead to revolutions. They occur as a result of once-in-a-generation players who add intrigue, competition, and entertainment value to everyone around them. Fans saw the danger in the Fever president's statement of creating a brand on par with Apple, which set off a firestorm. The same risk that doomed other franchises that attempted to replace their star with a logo. Nobody is more aware of the truth than the athletes in that locker room. They have seen it up close and even played by it. Additionally, they consistently emphasize that playing with Caitlin Clark isn't simply different in every interview, social media post, and poignant sideline moment. It's a chance that doesn't present itself twice. The Fever would do